Hello and welcome to the Artellectuals podcast. For this week's episode, we have an awesome guest who is actually a colleague, and we met at Stony Brook University. He is a composer, pianist, and teacher. Alan is one of the most hardworking and disciplined people I know, waking up at ungodly hours to work on his projects. He has had many successes over his career, some of which were especially exciting for me to hear about, like having his film music appear in luxury car commercials and across major platforms. He also plays keyboard for a band he's a part of called JIA, and one of the founding members for the chamber group Pathos Trio. This interview went quite in depth about his process in achieving his success, and I'm excited to share his story with you. You can find more information about Alan on his website, alanhankers.com. There you can find his work and links to his content. Before we continue, please take a moment to hit the like and subscribe buttons if you're on YouTube, or leave a rating and review if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts. Thank you. Now, I am honored to present today's podcast with Alan Hankers. Well, thank you so much, Alan, for coming on the show and giving your time today. We'd love to learn more about your music career, how you got started and everything. So can you tell us a little bit about where it all began, like how did music get influenced in your life and what impact it had on you in the beginning?
Yeah, well, it's my pleasure to be here and talk with you about all things music. So I would say the first musical encounter that I had that was really kind of significant, that I could kind of trace everything back to, was when I was 7 years old. I was playing recorder in school. I don't know if you had to do this, but, in 3rd, 4th grade or whatever, we all learned recorder. And I would go home and I wouldn't practice the music that I was supposed to practice. Instead, I would listen to my favorite video game soundtracks, and I would learn all of the different lines. A lot of them were sort of like polyphonic, like string writing. So I would learn all of the lines and record myself on some cheap cassette device. And I was sort of obsessed with doing this. And at the time, I didn't know what the long-term implication of that would be. I just loved playing music. I loved listening to music, and I didn't know it at the time, but I also loved writing it. I loved learning these lines, pre-existing lines, and then making them my own through embellishment or, actually changing them in various ways that my inner ear suggested. But again, this was without any sort of formal music education, and it was just purely for the love of it. So those early events, are kind of what led me into studying music formally. And then from there, as it does, it kind of became this sort of snowballing effect. And now it's my life. It's funny how you can.
That's great. How did you compose in the beginning when you didn't have the technical skills yet?
So I actually had a good friend of mine who also was learning recorder at the same time, and we would get together and we would take turns playing ostinatos. And again, at the time, we didn't really know what we were doing, but one of us kind of took a background role while the other one kind of improvised on a pre-existing melody and then kind of taking it into different places. And it was very much a dialogue between a friend and myself. So that was the earliest form of composing that I think I did. I lived with my grandparents at the time, and they had noticed that I was taking an interest in music, and my grandmother had really wanted to get a piano for a long time, and this seemed like the impetus to do so. So she found a sort of cheap piano, and we bought it. And then I started improvising on the piano, having harmonies now, being able to actually make vertical sonorities. And again, no music theory knowledge whatsoever. Just using my ear and just kind of letting that guide me. And I spent a tremendous amount of time doing that when I was younger, hours a day of just playing and listening and, finding friends who are also interested in kind of exploring that together. It was definitely a group effort now that I think about it. So, yeah.
Great. And where were you raised at that time with your grandparents?
This was in New York.
Where were you based?
Yeah.
Oh, in New York.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. And so that all has cascaded, or not cascaded, but rather influenced your decision to continue. So what was the what formal training did you have after you were on the piano, and Which schools did you go to?
So when I was younger, I picked up the flute first, and I liked the flute a lot. I was in fourth grade, but all my friends were not playing flute. They were all playing saxophone or what have you. So I was like, oh, I want to go hang out with my friends because again, like playing music was a group thing, and it became a little solitary when I chose the flute and they were all doing other things. So I switched to saxophone. Didn't like it. Then I finally settled on piano. I started taking piano lessons, and that's been my primary instrument, and I would say my only instrument now. I haven't picked up the flute or the saxophone in what, like 12 years, if not longer. I dabbled in it for here and there, but I still own a flute and a bunch of string instruments. But anyway, yeah, so piano became my primary instrument. And I studied that throughout high school. I studied classical, like, just like your traditional Western classical repertoire, Beethoven, Chopin, what have you, Bach. But I was always interested in rock music too. I grew up listening to bands like Yes, Dream Theater when I was really young, like 13 years old. My dad had an obsession with Yes. He was like a huge Yes fan. And, I have memories of listening to like 22-minute long tracks, like Close to the Edge when I was like, 7 or 8, just like hanging out with my family. So this sort of connection to progressive rock music is kind of tied to sentimental sort of memories. So I don't know. I grew up just always wanting to keep that going, and I love that kind of music. So when I wasn't practicing Beethoven, I was getting together with my friends, and we were playing, rock shows. And I was playing with guys who were 10, 12 years older than me. I remember I was 14 years old, and my other band members were 22, 23. And I remember playing venues and not being allowed to go inside because I was under 18. I had to wait outside with my mom until we went to play, and then I'd load in and load out and go home. But it was great. I love doing that. So I, at the time, just saw that as a hobby, something that was fun. I lived and breathed that music, but as far as what would it unfold and lead to, I didn't spend too much time thinking about that with regards to playing with bands. But at the tender age of 28, I see that now as being such a fundamental experience to who I am now. Very much so. And it really led to a lot of other things happen. It's funny, but I feel like this sort of traditional classical path and then this sort of more vernacular non-classical path. I hate to categorize something as classical and non-classical. I think that's kind of like very limited view, but in my own world, that's how it feels. I had these two paths, and they are both equally as important. And there's definitely a conversation that's happening between them at all times. And I didn't realize it at the time. Now I see it, but at that time I didn't. So eventually I started studying composition in high school. I had a private teacher. He was great. He introduced me to all of these composers. I mean, that was the first time I heard Charles Ives. That was the first time I heard Messiaen. It's the first time I heard Takemitsu. It's the first time I heard Sariaho. All these composers that, we get exposed to in our undergraduate classical composition programs. So I had a pretty early exposure to that stuff, 10th, 11th grade. And it was immediately clear that that's the route I wanted to take. I remember I heard Berg's Piano Sonata, and that piece like blew my mind when I heard it for the first time. And I remember thinking, I want to do that. I want to go and I want to write something like this. I want to play something like this. It was so visceral and so colorful, and there was a lot of inertia to that music. There's a lot of tension, and that really connected with me, actually, in a way that a lot of like rock and metal music connects with me, to be honest. Strange comparison, Berg and metal music. But anyway, yeah. So I found like both parts of myself in this kind of music, strangely, and I decided, okay, I'm going to apply to schools. I had a really good run of auditions for my undergrad. I got into a bunch of programs, but financially, it made the most sense for me to go to a state school in New York. I was lucky to get a pretty nice scholarship. The faculty were really great. I went to Fredonia, which is in Western New York. It's like 45 minutes away from Buffalo. For those of you who may not know where Fredonia is.
That was for undergrad, right?
For undergrad, exactly. So I majored in composition. modern and piano performance. And even though it was a minor, I feel like piano was actually a major for me. I felt like I was in the practice room more than I was writing. I think I was practicing 3 or 4 hours a day and then writing like 2 to 3 hours a day. I accompanied a lot. I played in ensembles. It was great. It was just an amazing place to be. I love the faculty. I love my friends in cohort. Many of the people I met there are close friends today, and I think, lifelong collaborators. So it was a really special place for me to kind of hunker down and leave the world and kind of exist in this strange little college town and just focus on, whatever I wanted to focus on that I felt was important to me or what my teachers felt like I should be looking at. So it was a good place for me to kind of start that college education. And then
you felt that support was essential for you in terms of, all the friends around you were really influencing your decision to continue on this path?
It was. And, it was actually the first time in my life where I walked away from that sort of vernacular music. I stopped playing with bands for 4 years. I didn't play a single show with a rock band or anything. I still was involved with groups. I was actually still writing with a group. But it was a very small part of my life, and it didn't eat up a lot of my time. So I kind of focused more on this classical tradition for the first time in my life. That was like 95% of what I was doing rather than 70 or 60%. I think it's always been swayed towards classical music, though. I think that's always been my focus. But yeah, that time was really important. I did a lot of important listening, a lot of playing. And it allowed me to escape, that sort of balanced world, and, get to dive into the other side of the pool a little bit more. And then in 2015, I graduated from Fredonia with my bachelor's, and I accepted an offer at Stony Brook University, where years later, Marcel, you and I would meet. I started my master's there in 2015, and I have been there since. I'm hopefully finishing up next year with my PhD. So, it'll be 5 years altogether.
Nice.
Yeah, for master's PhD, fingers crossed, it's just 5 years. And that program was a great fit. The people there, the caliber of players, the caliber of composers, the faculty, it was just an amazing place to be.
It is an amazing place, yeah.
I taught there for 3 years as a teaching assistant. I started teaching introductory music theory in 2015. And then I taught aural skills the next year. And then this past year, I taught post-tonal analysis, and then another music theory course and introductory class again. So I have interacted with the undergrads quite a bit. And I think in teaching, it first of all solidified me this passion for college teaching that I suspected that I had, but getting in front of a class and having a dialogue with students about this very rich history of music that we have, it's a real privilege, I think. And it taught me a lot about myself. So that was a huge takeaway for me at Stony Brook, to be able to do that. And yeah, I think I really developed my voice there as a composer too. I think that's where I really found out who I was.
Great. What's your recording style, and how has it shifted throughout your time at Stony Brook?
My recording style with regards to the classical music, or kind of other things?
I guess you've been covering multiple, genres of composing, right? You've been doing all kinds of things. But has there been a shift in focus as you've been progressing through that master's and doctoral position?
I don't think there's been a shift in focus. There has been the past month and a half because of quarantine. I find that I'm doing a lot more studio work. I'm almost only doing studio work. I am not really writing as much chamber or orchestral music. I still am, but not like I was. That's changing, but there was a month and a half where I was really only doing studio work. But I did make connections in other industries that allowed me to find that balance again that I was talking about. It kind of became off-centered when I went to Fredonia. Coming back to the New York metropolitan area, the first thing I did when I started my master's was I reached out to, I want to say over 100 post-production houses. I just emailed them. Post-production, in this case being, sound design, audio editing, and music for I apply for everything: television, radio, multimedia, video games, everything I could find in the New York area I applied to. I just sent my cover letter, sent an email, sent my resume, sent my portfolio, and said, I'm Alan, blah, 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 just graduated, started my master's. And at that time, I did not have any professional credits to my name whatsoever. I'd never scored. I'd only scored student films. I'd never done anything that was on IMDb or any commercials or anything like that. So I was totally fresh. And not to undermine doing student films or anything like that. As a matter of fact, if there's anybody that watches this that's an undergrad or younger, even a master's student films, I think, are essential to score and learn your process, learn how to work the software, because it's like saying you want to be a professional performer, but never actually performing before you get the job, right? That doesn't really make sense. I think you need to do those things in order to kind of discover your own process. But anyway, I sent these documents out with no experience whatsoever. I was asking for an internship position, but even for an internship position, those are very competitive. And usually you need to know somebody, or most of the students getting those are like, your undergrads and your NYU, music technology programs or something like that. But I got really lucky. One company reached out to me there by the name of Amber Music. At the time, they were based in Dumbo, Brooklyn. And the music supervisor reached out to me and he invited me for an interview. I drove to Brooklyn the next day and I sat down with him for 20 minutes and we just talked. There was an immediate chemistry and he really liked the music that I was doing. He was familiar with some of the bands that I played with, actually. He had followed one of them for a while. So there was that kind of connection. And he invited me to be an intern there. And he said, you'll learn the back end of the industry. You'll learn, what we're doing with regards to the administration and, the commissioning process. And we'll also, give you practice files, we'll give you old commercials to write to, and I'll send you the brief. The brief is like a description of what they want for the music from the ad agency. So I would go in, I would take the train in at like 7:00 in the morning. I would wake up earlier. I'd wake up at like 4 and do my composing. Wow. I'd write 4 to 6, get ready around 6:30, leave, catch the train around 7:00. I forget what exact time it was. Get into Brooklyn, like through the door at 10. I'd work 10 to 4, 10 to 5. And a lot of times there wasn't that much for me to do. I'm sorry if they're watching right now and they're hearing this, but there wasn't that much for me to do. So I would actually do my reading. I would read like academic articles and take notes for, my seminars. And then at the end of the day, they would give me a practice clip. They'd give me a Mercedes commercial or something. And they would say, okay, like, here's the brief, go and write something. So I'd go home on the train. I'd start writing on the train on my laptop, get home, eat dinner as fast as humanly possible. And I'd write that picture till I fall asleep, pretty much till I collapsed. And then I'd wake up the next morning, do the same thing again. And I got really, really good at scoring commercials. Like I found, again, similar to what I was saying about student films, I sort of found my process. And eventually my internship ended. I remember the creative director and the music supervisor took me out for lunch and we were sitting at this table and I was about to go out on tour for a month with one of the bands I was playing. And we were just talking about it. And the creative director said, well, when you come back, why don't you just work for us? And I said, that's great. I would love that. So since then, I've been a composer for Amber since 2016. And, I pitch a lot of music for their work. I was lucky to land jobs. The most recent one I did was a Lincoln commercial for them. It was one of the more recent aviator commercials. So that's something I love to do. And again, it's a different medium than, my chamber music and my orchestral music. But at the same time, I feel like there's it's the same person just working on these different projects. And I've come to realize that I don't think I could do just one without the other. Like I need those things. And it might not be practical to do them all concurrently, but I love being able to jump. And I consider myself really lucky to be able to do that. But it's an enormous amount of time. Every Monday through Sunday, I wake up 6 a.m., 7 a.m. And that's late for me. I wake up around that time and I go to like 5, 6 o'clock at night. And that's like a minimum window. Like that's the light day, so it's a lifestyle, but I'm really happy doing it, and I'm lucky to be able to do it.
It's amazing. And I found it fascinating how, I'm a musician, I'm a string player, and, we don't know a lot about the technological advances that have come, through with composing right now.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned how you were playing flute, and now you could create a flute sound that even can fool the ears of the most, top performers who wouldn't, maybe not a flutist, but for me, certainly,
Yeah.
I would be able to not be able to tell, actually, because you're so skilled at manipulating every aspect of that. It would be nice to learn a little more, like, how you got into that medium of being able to compose, but with that level of detail. Like, you didn't start that way, I'm assuming.
No, certainly not. And as I got older, we call them sample libraries. If you're writing orchestral music, there are different sample libraries of, all of the orchestral, like strings, winds, brass, percussion. They have all of those instruments and different articulations and different parameters that you can actually automate. So if I write a flute line, I can automate the amount of vibrato. I can automate the dynamics, the expression to make it sound realistic. And those sample libraries has been increasingly becoming better and more accessible. They were very expensive for a long time. I think it was very difficult. I didn't have access to those type of libraries when I was starting out. Which I think is a blessing, because I think you need to learn how to make something sound really good with limited materials. If you can make out of the box, like basic Logic or basic GarageBand sound like these top libraries or something that comes close to it, when you finally do start working with those better libraries, you're going to, I think, be more skilled and more nuanced with working with them. But as you were saying, there are really realistic libraries out there. But those libraries in and of themselves, they sound great, but you need to have a deep understanding of how those instruments work. Like you need to your basic kind of compositional knowledge of orchestration and instrumentation. Like, why are you giving this line to a clarinet? Like why in that register? Or why are you giving this to this string instrument on that string versus, the G versus the D string? Or what it means to play a sul pont versus tasto. What's a down bow? What's an up bow? When a horn player is going to take a breath, it's like these things that are very fundamental to just studying the technical aspect of music is what allows you to make a very realistic, what we call a mock-up, when you have, something that's not real, like it's MIDI, so you need to have that foundation. And I think actually being a performer is essential, because what you're doing when you make those mock-ups is you are programming your own musical intuition for every single line. So when I compose something for orchestra and I'm doing it through MIDI, all of the dynamics, all of the tempo changes, all of the articulations, all of the elements of the musical phrasing and execution, those are all from me, and those are all meticulously programmed using the computer. I will often sing through lines and record myself. For percussion lines, I will actually play them on a pad or something, because I find that my musical intuition comes out through the physical act of music making. So I find that I'm much quicker and far more efficient at programming those parameters and those phrasing elements when I perform them. Whereas if I don't perform them and I'm just imagining them and I'm kind of sitting there clicking it in, I lose that tactility, that physical connection to the sound. So what I guess what I'm trying to get at here is that in order to make this realistic mock-up that you're talking about, I draw on my experiences from classical music as a pianist and as a composer of like writing, chamber orchestral music or what have you. So I don't think you can do those things without that knowledge. I think it'd be really challenging and time consuming, or more time consuming, because it is time consuming.
Right. And it's true that in history, we've also seen that great non-classical composers are very heavily influenced by it. Beatles and several other artists, that's part of the integral structure of their pieces, if you really analyze it. So it's interesting that you brought that up, that it's such a, and you're teaching as well. So you have a really good knowledge of tonal analysis and all those technical aspects of composing. Does that really impact your current compositions? Like, how
Oh,
do you think that that is?
for sure.
Because you mentioned, tension and all that. That does bring a lot of that into the game.
Yes. And I mean, I think for everybody, their engagement with theory and analysis, the usefulness of it might differ, or like depending on what type of music they're analyzing and how they're analyzing it, which analytical system they're using, and even who taught them how to use that system. Because, I think there's a way, I think students can get pretty boxed in when they learn theory. I think they forget the reason why we're learning it. It's not to necessarily say this is what you do and this is what you don't do, but we're learning the importance of working within restrictions and limitations, right? So when you take, I think my headphones are going to die, but when you take a counterpoint class, or when you take a tonal harmony class and you're learning about sonata form, it's not that you're expected to write in sonata form for the rest of your life, right? But it's just learning how to understand, how to navigate the decision-making process within an established grammar, within an established repertoire, or style, I should say. And
it's like learning to walk before running, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, when you're used to dealing with restrictions and limitations, and you can successfully navigate that, whatever you do in the future, whenever you establish those limitations for your own piece, because every piece imposes its own limitations and its own rules. You'll be more comfortable, and you'll be able to get your groundings because you've done it before in so many different styles. And by doing this in different styles, you actually kind of find your voice too. So yeah, I mean, when I'm working with students and I'm talking about theory and analysis, I like to keep that in mind. And for me personally, one of the most useful classes that I've taken as an undergraduate, master's, and PhD student, they were the counterpoint classes. For me, it's not always a matter of what type of sonorities you're using, but how you're navigating between those sonorities. The shape and the contour and the consistency. How, not necessarily where you're coming from and where you're going in terms of Roman numeral analysis, but actually how you're leaving and how you're arriving. That is equally as important. And I think that for me, when I'm working with my music, that tends to be very polyphonic, very horizontal. I don't always think in terms of chords. I rarely ever do, to be honest. Those organizational principles of motion is what guides my decision-making process and what balances what I'm thinking from what I'm hearing. So yeah, those counterpoint classes, sitting there and playing all of these Bach, chorales, and just going into every single voice and really listening to how the music moves and how the motion is created, that was really influential to the way that I think about motion in my music. So yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Speaking of limitations, now we're in the middle of a quarantine. I don't know if it's middle. Hopefully it's less than middle. But your current situation right now, how impacted is it by this? Because you're able to do things pretty much remotely at this point. You're composing at home. You're busy with that. You're also teaching online. Now that the semester finished, you're done with that. But what's the process now for you looking to the next several months? How are you shifting and adapting to this?
Well, I think it's changed everything for me personally. On this very surface level, I could start talking about that. I mean, I was supposed to go down to Mississippi in April and give a lecture and have a piece premiered. In June, I was supposed to go to Michigan for a festival and have a piece premiered. And all of those projects that, so much time and energy went into were bumped, so those things just didn't happen. And, that's unfortunate, but not the end of the world, but it's unfortunate. So on a very surface level, it definitely affected what's happening. And all of the projects that I was working on for the imminent future have been postponed as well. So there's all of us, I mean, they still need to get done. Like I still need to write these pieces, and I still have the need to write these pieces. However, the urgency is not there. So it slowed me down in that way, that I'm taking a lot longer to write because I have that liberty. And I think it made me realize how enslaved I am to the deadline. Maybe enslaved is a strong word, but maybe how the deadline helps me move things.
But that motivates you.
It does. It's not
Right.
necessary. I mean, even if you told me right now that my music would never be performed again, I think I would wake up every day and still write, because that's just how doing that is how I kind of engage with my version of reality, right? Like that's how I come to understand things through the lens of this, this composer. And I think even if you broke my hands and took music away, I think I'd find something else creative to do. I think that's just who I am as a person. But anyway, yeah. So on a very surface level, everything's been moved back, and because of that, I've lost motivation a little bit. But I haven't stopped working. I still wake up every day, and I make sure that I do something every day. I've been lucky to have a lot of studio projects that just happen to fall into this period. Like I play in this band called Jia. It's piano, bass, and guitar, and we've been writing for a year and a half together. And all of our music that we've been working on is now coming out just now, and it's by coincidence because we actually planned all of the PR and all of the releases in the summer. So it's just coincidence that it's happening now, and there's a lot of work that goes into that. So I've been focusing a lot on that project because it's sort of been the thing to kind of get me through. I mean, it means a lot. I would have spent that work in that time anyway, but maybe not in such a concentrated amount of time. So
Wait, I want to actually plug that group in. You have a website or Instagram that people can view that group and perhaps purchase content?
Yeah, for sure. We're on Spotify. We're on YouTube. We're on Instagram. The band's name is Jia, Jia. Just stands for Jacob, Ivan, and Alan. Just our names, because we couldn't come up with a better name. So there it is. And yeah, we're really excited about that group. We've been working together. The three of us have actually been playing music together for 10 years. We used to tour with another band together years ago. And we've just been really close and really close musical collaborators and kind of like family. So it's just kind of nice to kind of be doing this project with them again and sort of seeing it come to life. So it's been great. But so on the surface level, I mean, that's how this whole pandemic has impacted me. On a deeper level, it actually really concerns me. It makes me wonder what music making will look like after this is all over. I don't think anybody can answer that. I think we have our own intuitions and ideas about where things are going, but there's no way to really know. I think things will look different for sure. And I think the artistic community is going to be faced with the question of what does music making look like after something like this happens? And then, of course, there's a more sort of humanistic perspective that I take, and that is, how can we redefine what it means to connect as people after this is all over? I think musicians and artists are going to have that responsibility, not exclusively, but I think that it will fall on us to lead the way on how can we bring people together after all of this is over, and what role do we play in that? So there's a lot of questions and a lot of uncertainties. And for that reason, I find it concerning. But I'm an optimist at heart, so I think that we'll find a way. But it makes me wonder, and I also feel really down because I see so many of my close friends and colleagues just completely out of commission. Because they were not prepared to deal with this. They had their careers or their concerts or what have you, and this hit, and suddenly all of that comes to a screeching halt. And it's hard to see people dealing with that. And, I'm involved in these projects where it's my responsibility to be producing and to be sharing that art. And it's helping me. But at the same time, I guess I feel a great deal of guilt to be doing things when so many of my friends who are just so amazing are kind of frozen in time a little bit. So it's actually kind of awful, I think. And it makes you realize how good things were when everybody was doing their own thing, and it was just this very vibrant life that you loved, but you didn't realize how essential it was.
And no one saw it coming, right?
Yeah, so it's just really hard. I just, there's just this internal pull for me, or just this internal kind of, I don't know, just conflict of like, I wish I could help people, and I wish that, you know what I'm saying. I'm having a hard time articulating it, but it's just difficult to see people who deserve to do what they do not being able to do that thing.
Yep.
So it's tough.
Right.
It's very tough.
Yeah, I do think that we will see, there will be an end to this eventually. But it is interesting to see how things will adapt. I think it is also, in a way, with this limitation, is making us think a little bit broader, for the future, and also putting as much time and effort now to think of different ways to be productive, And you certainly are, still doing your work, and tons of musicians are still collaborating, and there's so many different things now that are coming out that haven't been done before.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting with the limitation. I mean, of course, we'd rather not have this at all, but it's just interesting how we are able to adapt, and thanks to technology, we can do that. I have one more question for you. So, since this is more of an educational interview, I would like to have our audiences learn a bit more what you would recommend for them. What kind of words of wisdom would you have for them if they are pursuing music, whether it's composition or solo musician or other facets of music or art? What are some meaningful things you can say to them to help them carry through?
I think for young musicians, whatever that means, what is young, by some standards, I'm still considered a young composer, right? And maybe I'll always feel that way. But I think, for young kids getting into it, elementary, middle, high school, undergrads, say yes to everything. I think not everything, but you know what I mean? Be open. Things that you might initially be inclined to say, no, thanks to, that's not my bag. Maybe question why, and maybe give it a shot. Be open to other opportunities and experiences, because that's the only way that you're going to really know for sure what you want. And maybe you do something and it's not something that you'd ever want to do again, but I do believe that there's something to learn from it. There are lessons to be had from just doing a variety of things, a variety of musical experiences and non-musical experiences too. So that's the first thing I would say, is just be open to other things. I would also say be kind to your colleagues, to those that you work with. And I think that you should always be looking to help others around you, because this is a community. And I think that's a really healthy and essential mentality, especially for those of us in the classical community, is to be accepting and to be encouraging, and, not in a artificial way, but, you should always be looking to give back, I think. And there are so many ways that you can do that. I think that that's what makes this community very special. And I think that that's something that's going to allow this community to grow and to adapt even in crazy times, unprecedented times like this. And then maybe more specific, I would say for composers who are really serious, who are, again, like planning to do this for a career, I think you have to be open to other things outside of just chamber and orchestral music in the more Western classical tradition, because as essential as those skills are, and those are that music is so close to my heart, and it's something I live and breathe. I think that you're going to need other skills. Like, I think you're going to need, and this might not even be new, this might not be something that they haven't heard before. I'm sure they hear it from their teachers or friends or whatever, but I feel like they need to say it. Really take the other elements and the other avenues very seriously. Learn the software, learn things like Pro Tools, GarageBand, Logic, learn Max, MSP, Ableton, Reaper, all of these things. Try to get involved as much as you can, because these tools are becoming the norm. Like, they're essential. And if you want to compose music for television or film, you're definitely going to need to know these. If you want to just stick to classical and chamber music and you're given that opportunity, you're probably going to use these software to edit your own recordings or to edit rehearsal recordings. Education and being a teacher, whether at the high school level or the college level, these are mediums that students are interested in. I think every single undergrad that I have taught at Stony Brook for just composition lessons, they're all interested in film and video game music, and they all come in with their digital audio workstations and have questions. And I think it's something that future educators should be well versed in and prepared to address, because these are the demands of the rising generations. So I think it's a responsibility to be familiar with them, and I think that getting to know the software is going to actually benefit you in so many ways. So I would say you should do it.
Great. Wow. Well, thank you so much, Alan. This has been a wonderful interview and super informative for me as well. So thank you for your time, and I hope we could do this again in the future.
Yeah, man. Thank you for having me.